Hi there, welcome to Explain This, a podcast where we try to explain complex things in simpler ways for people of all ages. I'm your host Jinkin, and today I thought we'd try something different. Instead of explaining one complex, difficult concept to you, I thought I'd do a rapid-fire series of quick explanations. So instead of going deep in one very specific topic, we're going to go wide and cover a lot more ground in one episode. On that note, today we'll explain to you how various body parts, specifically the so-called vital organs, work. Let's get started. If there's one thing you learn to appreciate in the world of medicine, it's just how wonderfully complex and intricately connected the human body is. From the outside, we might just look like a fleshy bag of blood, but the more you look, the more you notice how many moving parts there are, pumping and twitching and pulsing and zapping to keep you alive and conscious. The cool thing about our body is that we contain dozens and dozens of highly specialized body parts, called organs. An organ is basically a group of cells that have been organized to serve a specific function, and to perform them well. Because if they don't, you die. Now, there are way too many organs inside you for us to cover in one episode. So today we're going to focus on just 5 of them. The heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the liver, and the brain. Colloquially, these 5 organs are called the vital organs, because you require them to be alive. Vita meaning life in Latin and all. For example, if I was to say, cut out your beating heart out of your chest, you'd be very dead. Whereas if I bit off your ear, a la Mike Tyson, you'd just be very sore and very pissed at me, but you wouldn't be dead. Before we continue, the term vital organ is a bit of a misnomer, because modern medicine has let us do some crazy magical things, like keeping people alive even when their vital organs aren't functioning. But also, just because an organ doesn't get the fancy title of vital, doesn't mean it's not important. For example, if your entire small intestine was to die from a lack of blood, a condition called bowel ischemia, that's essentially non-survivable. Because of this, we don't really use the term vital organs in medicine. But for the purposes of today's episode, it lets us cut down the number of organs we'll explain to you. So, without further ado, let's jump straight into explaining how the vital organs function. For each organ, I'll briefly explain how they work to you as if you're a child, then we'll go into a more in-depth explanation. Let's start with the Planeteer's favorite organ, heart. The heart is quite possibly the best known organ in the human body. Possibly because it's the most noticeable. If you put your hand over the middle of your chest, you can feel a strong, rhythmic pounding like boom, 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 boom. The heart is like your body's main battery pack. Make sure to deliver the juice to the rest of your body by pumping blood through your blood vessels continuously. You can also think of your heart as an automatic bicycle pump. Every time it squeezes, it pushes blood out forwards. When it relaxes, it fills with fresh new blood, ready to get pumped into your body with the next squeeze. The heart has some cool features, like valves that stop blood going backwards so that the pump only pushes blood forwards into the body, rather than giving and taking the blood like a teasing little tart. It's also completely automatic because it has its own electrical signal that tells the heart to beat in a nice, synchronized, ordered manner, like a coach blowing their whistle so all the rowers know when to row. So for millennia, the heart has been associated with life itself, because even early humans could feel their heart bounding actively in their chest, and they knew that if a person's heart wasn't beating anymore, they'd never wake up again. This is because the heart has the extremely important role of circulating blood through your body, delivering food and oxygen to the cells, while removing all the waste products and carbon dioxide. It's essentially coordinating the food delivery service and the sewage removal service at the same time. Now, I mentioned that the heart is like a muscular pump that pushes blood around in a circuit, but in reality, there are 2 circuits with the heart right in the middle of them. There's a circuit you already know about, the body or the systemic circuit. The heart is divided into 2 halves, left and right. The left side of the heart is the bigger half, pumping fresh, oxygenated blood from the lungs to the rest of the body through arteries. Blood then travels all around the body, dropping off essential fuel. Then it completes the systemic circuit, returning back to the heart via the veins. Now, if you only had one circuit, your heart would be repumping this old dirty blood back to your cells, which defeats the point. You die pretty quickly. So instead, the right half of your heart receives the old blood from the body, then pumps it into another circuit, the pulmonary circuit, which connects the heart and the lungs. The right heart pushes blood through the lungs, where the blood gets all freshened up with oxygen and the carbon dioxide is removed. The blood is then pumped back into the left heart, all fresh and clean and ready for the systemic circuit again. This whole ordeal takes only a minute, and the heart pumps regularly about 60 to 80 times a minute, without any breaks, to continuously supply fresh blood to your body, while sending old blood to your lungs to get oxygenated. And because it's very important that the blood only flows in this exact direction, your heart has several valves so that blood can't flow backwards. This means that when your heart squeezes, blood gets ejected from the heart. Then when the heart relaxes, the pressure drops and blood gets sucked out from the veins into the heart. But because the valve in front gets closed, the blood that has just been pumped out doesn't get sucked back in. It's a very cool, efficient system. The valves are what gives hearts the characteristic lup-dup, lup-dup sound when you listen to it with your ears to someone's chest, or if doctors using stethoscopes. We listen to heart sounds to figure out all sorts of things, such as whether the heart is beating regularly, or if a valve is too tight or too loose, or if there's a leaking hole in the heart causing havoc. So if your heart is a muscle pump, how does it know to pump every second without us thinking about it? Heart muscles are slightly different to your other muscles like biceps, which are called skeletal muscles because they're attached to bone. Firstly, heart muscle cells don't get fatigued, so even though it's pumping at about 100,000 times a day, it doesn't get any DOMS or cramps. Secondly, unlike skeletal muscles that only contract when they get nerve signals from the brain, the heart has its own electrical signal system. There's a tiny group of nerve cells in your heart that acts as a pacemaker. This means that every second, it sends out a little electric beep. This signal then gets carried throughout the heart through specialized fibers, so that it goes through the heart in an exact order. Now, because muscles contract when exposed to electricity, this exact order lets the heart squeeze in a very intricate rhythmic order. Specifically, the top of your heart, or atria, contract first, squeezing a small amount of blood to fill the bottom, more powerful chambers called ventricles. Then, the strong ventricles squeeze from bottom to top, squeezing all of the blood out into the arteries, both to the systemic and pulmonary circuits. Then the pacemaker sends out another signal, the heart beats again, and life goes on. The rhythmic electrical signal is what we're looking for on an ECG, or electrocardiogram. If there's a disturbance in this natural rhythm, the heart might beat erratically or ineffectively. That's why sometimes when a person's heart stops beating, we put on a defibrillator to figure out if the heart has no electricity or if it's just in a disorganized rhythm. Because if it's the latter, the defibrillator can shock the heart to get rid of the background noise, letting the pacemaker do its job properly and get the heart back into a proper, organized rhythm, so that the blood can flow. The cool thing about the pacemaker is that it's not fixed to one speed rate either. Your brain can send electrical or chemical signals to the heart to increase or decrease your heart rate depending on what's needed. For example, if you're exercising or really stressed, your brain tells the pacemaker to beat faster because you need to pump more blood through your body to feed the exercising muscles so you can fight or take flight. There's a lot more we can talk about the heart, but that's the basic gist of how it works. 4 valves, 2 circuits, 1 muscular pump, and a state-of-the-art electrical pacemaker system that keeps the whole thing going for the rest of your life. Now, let's move on to the other organ we mentioned as part of this system, the lungs. Every time you breathe in, your chest puffs out because your lungs are filling up with air. The lungs are like a pair of balloons, but not just any party balloons that are smooth on the inside, no. They're essentially bags filled with teeny tiny balloons, so that the lungs can maximize how much of it touches the air that is breathed in. In fact, it's so densely packed with tiny balloons that if you stretched out all of the surface of the lungs, you would die. And it would also be the size of a tennis court. So think about that. This is because the lungs are essential to steal oxygen from the air so the blood can transport it to cells to use as fuel, while breathing out the toxic carbon dioxide that cells make as part of their day-to-day work. So the bigger the surface area, the more you can swap out sweet oxygen from the air for your dirty, useless carbon dioxide. The lungs are the other half of the heart, and that without the lungs oxygenating the blood and removing the carbon dioxide, the heart is just circulating useless, dirty old blood. It would be like if you flushed the toilet, and it just made the water swirl around and the poo just floated around doing nothing. The process of taking oxygen from the air and breathing out carbon dioxide is called gas exchange. This happens thanks to a chemical process called diffusion, where gases want to move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Like if you farted, the smelly particles spread out into the room, where there is much less fart around. Sorry for all the toilet similes. Anyway, diffusion happens across an area, so if you're a smart lung, you want as big of a surface area as possible. So to do this, the lungs are designed to look like the fluffiest cauliflower in the world, with heaps of teeny tiny round bubbles called alveoli. It's basic maths. If you follow the airway from the top, air enters through your nose and mouth, down the throat, the larynx, and then the trachea or windpipe. So far, it's only one tube, which is a pretty small surface area. But then, the trachea splits in two to form the two main bronchi, which each split into two smaller bronchi. Then the bronchi keep splitting and splitting into even smaller bronchi and bronchioles, until eventually the bronchioles end in an alveolus each, where gas exchange happens. By this point, the airway has split so many times, doubling each time, it grows by exponential growth, and you have something around 480 million alveoli in your lungs. If it's too hard to conceptualize this, just think of a really wide piece of paper like a newspaper, and then scrunch it up into a ball. If you stretch the back out into the newspaper, you can see that the surface area is massive, but because you've crumpled it into a ball, you manage to pack all of that surface area into a much smaller volume. And that's essentially what your lungs are doing with the splitting airways. The alveoli sit right next to a capillary, or very tiny blood vessel, so oxygen and carbon dioxide can freely move between the thin walls, and voila, that's how breathing happens. Another important part of breathing is, well, the breathing itself. Unlike a normal balloon that you breathe into, your lungs work by sucking air out of the atmosphere. When you take a breath in, your ribcage lifts up to expand, hence why your chest puffs out. Your lungs are attached to the inner lining of your ribcage by surface tension, so when your chest expands, your lungs expand as well. This increases the volume of your lungs, and thanks to some clever physics and Boyle's law, this decreases the pressure inside, creating a small vacuum effect. And because the lungs are naturally elastic, when you relax, the ribcage collapses back and air gets forced out, and you breathe out. You repeat this around 10 to 12 times per minute, thanks to your brain's automatic breathing center. Now, if there was an air leak outside of the lungs, then the surface tension holding the lungs against the chest wall breaks, meaning the lungs can't expand, even if you puff out your chest as hard as you can. This is a condition called a pneumothorax, and it can result in the lung collapsing down into a crumpled ball, and it can potentially be very dangerous depending on how much the lung is collapsed. Another thing to note is that the lungs are very delicate because it's essentially a really fine sponge with lots of air spaces. If you touch it, it's the softest thing ever, which is definitely something I say that makes me sound like a serial killer. If you smoke cigarettes, the delicate airways get damaged over time because the toxic chemicals break down the elastic tissues in the lungs, causing secretions to build up. Eventually, a smoker's lungs get so destroyed to the point of no return, and they can't breathe out properly, so that the air gets trapped, their blood oxygen levels drop, their carbon dioxide levels build up, and it makes them feel like they're literally choking to death. This is COPD, and it's the real reason why people should not smoke cigarettes. That plus the lung cancer, heart disease, blood vessel blockages that result in amputations, and erectile dysfunction. So yeah, if you're a smoker, please stop, like right now. It's the best thing you'll do for your health. Protect those delicate, squishy, soft lungs that keep you alive. Now let's talk about the kidneys as if you were a child. Our body is filled with teeny tiny cell factories that do lots of good work and produce all kinds of wondrous things. But they also make a lot of junk and waste naturally. This builds up in your bloodstream, so our bodies need a special waste disposal system to get it out of our system. before we die from being poisoned by our own waste. This is where the kidneys come in. The kidneys are like smart filters. If you feed it blood, it runs it through lots and lots of layers of filters, with holes getting smaller and smaller and smaller, to filter out only the liquid and the dissolved salts. We wouldn't want you peeing out all of your blood cells, right? Then, the kidneys run this filtered liquid through a series of tubes. The tubes act like a production line of lab workers. They test how salty the liquid is, how much water is in your body right now, and how acidic your blood is, and then the lab workers do a little tinkering to remove or add things to the filtered liquid. And this is how you make pee. Your kidneys do a whole bunch of testing and fine-tuning to make sure that your blood is at a perfect concentration, which is why when you're dry, you make really dark concentrated pee. But when you drink too much water, you pee out a lot of clear pee, because there's too much water in your system. If you ask any medical student which subject they thought was one of the hardest, how kidneys work or renal physiology would almost always rank right at the top. I remember spending so much time bitching about how much we hate renal physiology. Because the kidneys are so wonderfully designed by evolution to do the job just right. But as wonderful as they are, people don't seem to know much about the kidneys, let alone where they live. If you ask someone to point to their kidneys, they usually point to their mid or lower back. But in reality, your kidneys, of which you have two, sit quite high up in your back. In fact, they lie just under the bottom edge of your ribcage. In fact, they lie pretty much just at the bottom of your ribcage, which is higher than most people think. The kidney has one large artery that feeds it blood, and one large vein that it drains blood to. The kidney's main job is to filter the blood of waste products, while balancing the salt and water level. It also has several other important functions like adjusting your blood pressure and involved in making vitamin D, but we'll focus on its main job today. Once blood enters the kidney, it goes through special bundled balls of blood vessels called glomeruli. These blood vessels have lots of tiny holes that are just wide enough for water, salts, and small proteins, but not big enough to fit important things in your blood like blood cells and platelets and large proteins like antibodies. We call these vessels fenestrated because they have tiny windows. Side note, if you ever need a fancy word for your creative writing, defenestration means to be thrown out of a window. There you go. Learn some English while you learn about medicine. Anyway, once blood is filtered through the glomeruli, which your kidney has a literal million of, it goes into another specialized tube called a nephron. Now this is the cool part. The nephron has different sections, each of which serve a specific function. One part of it will reabsorb sugars and salts such as sodium and potassium if it senses that your blood is not salty enough. While another part will dump extra waste products like acidic hydrogen ions and urea. Your kidneys are incredibly fine-tuned to make minute adjustments to your blood concentrations of dozens of chemicals, including water. This is why poor medical students get a headache trying to learn all of the complex pathways. There's also a big loop of the nephron that goes deep into the core of the kidneys, where the tissue is much, much saltier. You know how when you have a cut on your skin, it stings when you swim in the ocean? This is because water likes to move from less salty areas to more salty areas, so saltiness draws water out. The kidneys use this mechanism, called osmosis, to draw out water from the filtered liquid, so you don't waste all of the water immediately. This is a super simple explanation of how the countercurrent exchange mechanism works, but trust me when I say it wrinkles your brain trying to learn the fine details of how it works, so we'll kind of gloss over it. Anyway, your kidneys are really good at absorbing back the water it filtered out of your blood, so that you don't have to guzzle bottles of water each day. If it senses that you're overhydrated, it will reabsorb less water. But if you're dehydrated, it will try its dang hardest to conserve every drop of water possible, sucking it back out of the urine into the bloodstream. That's why we can use the volume of urine output to measure how well a patient is doing when they're very sick. Little urine production means that their body is really struggling to keep up, and the kidneys are suffering. So, make sure you drink enough water to stay hydrated and keep your kidneys happy. Side note, the adorable kangaroo rat that lives in deserts has a very advanced kidney that is so efficient that they don't need to drink water to survive. They get enough water just from food. Nature is so freaking cool. So yeah, that's basically how kidneys work. A super advanced filter that can automatically balance your water and salt levels, while peeing out waste products to keep your blood nice and clean and the perfect concentration. This is an important concept in physiology called homeostasis. Cells are such intricate, fine-tuned machines that they need optimum working environments. So life evolved around how to keep that environment as stable and consistent as possible, which is why we have so many cool feedback loops and auto-adjustment pathways in our bodies to keep everything perfectly regulated. So give your body some damn respect and drink more water, homie. Alright, we're up to number 4 on our vital organs list. The liver. The liver is so important for you to stay alive that even its name is liver. Heyo. No, but seriously, the liver is very important because it does a lot of different jobs to keep you alive. It's the second largest organ in your body, second only to skin. It lives right under the right side of your ribcage, all the way up to just under your nipple. It's massive. The liver's most important job is breaking down poisons in your blood, like drugs and alcohol. That's right, kids, it's wrong to do drugs and your body does not like it. Anyway, the liver breaks down poisons, or toxins, by using special protein scissors called enzymes. These enzymes are tailor-made for each toxin, and when it detects the toxin in the blood, it runs up to it, grabs it in a headlock, then chops off a part of it like its ponytail. Sometimes, instead of cutting off a part of the toxin, the enzyme will add something to it instead, like slapping on a "kick me" sign on its back. Either way, the altered toxin can't do its job because it's either too embarrassed or gets beaten up by the rest of the body, and eventually gets disintegrated or peed out by the kidneys. So yeah, it's pretty cool knowing that your body comes pre-installed with a poison detector and treatment center. Unfortunately, your liver can't tell the difference between poisons that your enemies have put in your food to kill you versus the medicines that your doctor gave to treat you. So sometimes, scientists have to make clever modifications to medications to evade the liver's antitoxin systems, because otherwise your liver would destroy them before they can work on you. Now, the way the liver detoxifies chemicals and toxins can get very complicated, with words like hydroxylation, glucuronidation, and cytochrome P450 dependent mixed function oxidase systems. So we'll keep it simple and describe essentially what the liver is doing. The liver has many different ways to neutralize what it deems to be foreign chemicals. The first phase is by exposing the chemical to harsh chemical reactions that breaks the molecule or changes it to make it useless. You can think of it as rusting down a machine so that it can't function. We call this modification because the liver is changing the toxin to make it useless. The second phase is tagging the chemical with another chemical to change the nature of it. For example, the liver might add a big chunky group of atoms to a drug, which changes its shape so that it can't bind to a receptor to do its job. Or it might flag it as rubbish that the body recognizes and actively chucks it down the rubbish chute for disposal, such as peeing it out through the kidneys. This step is called conjugation because the liver is joining other chemicals to the toxin. This might be all a bit hard to grasp, so let's use a common toxin as an example: alcohol. The reason you get buzzed when you drink is because it's a poison that dulls your brain functioning. So your liver, naturally, tries to destroy the alcohol to stop it from damaging you. Good liver. When the alcohol enters the bloodstream through your stomach and intestines, it gets taken to the liver. Here, a specialized enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase breaks alcohol down into another chemical called acetaldehyde. Now here's the funny thing. Your liver is trying to help you by breaking down alcohol, but in the process, it makes this acetaldehyde, which also happens to be harmful to the body. This is the chemical that gives you a bad hangover, such as flushing, headaches, and feeling severely nauseous. It's also a carcinogen, as in it increases your risk of developing cancer. You might have heard about the Asian flush syndrome, where many people of East Asian descent can't drink alcohol well because they get really red in the face and feel very sick every time they drink. The common misconception is that they can't tolerate the alcohol and it's building up in their body too quickly, but turns out it's the opposite problem. People who have the Asian flush actually have too strong of an alcohol dehydrogenase, making them super efficient at breaking down alcohol. Unfortunately, this means they build up acetaldehyde much quicker, essentially getting all the bad symptoms of a hangover without getting much buzz from the alcohol. Weirdly though, this helps protect these people from developing the negative consequences of alcohol, such as hangovers, alcoholism, and liver cancer, because they tend to drink less often. In fact, we sometimes give alcoholic patients a drug called disulfiram, which induces the same effect to put people off drinking. Anyway, fortunately, the liver doesn't just stop there. It has another enzyme to break down the acetaldehyde to a much less harmful acetic acid, which can be peed out. One more related note on how your liver breaks down alcohol is that the enzyme that helps break down alcohol also helps metabolize and break down the drug paracetamol, or acetaminophen, as in Panadol or Tylenol depending on where you live. If you drink heavily, then your liver is using all of its enzymes breaking down alcohol that it doesn't have enough to break down the paracetamol. This can increase your risk of getting paracetamol poisoning, which is why they say not to mix the two. In reality, having a couple tablets of Panadol after one glass of wine is perfectly safe, but like with everything in life, moderation is key. This is a good example of how the liver uses one enzyme to break down many different toxins, so that's why we have weird drug interactions in medicine and we tell people not to drink grapefruit juice when they're on the pill, for example. So that's the gist of how your liver breaks down harmful chemicals. The liver is also involved in storing carbohydrate fuel in the form of glycogen, making glucose, or sugar, from fats and proteins, building proteins for your blood, making coagulation factors so your blood can clot, regulating your cholesterol, clearing debris from your blood like dead cells, and storing a bunch of vitamins like vitamin A. So in summary, your liver is a very, very, very busy organ that does a ton of work to keep you alive. So please stop trying to kill it with binge drinking. Oh, one last cool thing about the liver. Out of all the organs in your body, it's the one with the most regenerative powers. It's incredible how powerful the liver's healing capabilities are. As long as half of your liver survives, the liver can regrow back to its original size, which lets us cut sections of liver out safely, for example when you're donating half your liver for a liver transplant. The funny thing is that the ancient Greeks probably knew this already, because there's the story of Prometheus, who was punished for stealing fire from the gods to give to the humans, by being tied to a rock and having an eagle come daily to pick his liver out. His liver would regenerate overnight, and then the eagle would come back the next day for a painful, bloody meal, so that his torture would continue ad infinitum. There you go. Alright, 4 down, 1 to go. Let's move on to our last vital organ. Brain. Out of all the organs in our body, the most important is the brain. According to the brain. No, seriously, think about it. The brain is the only thing in the universe that can think about itself. It's almost like the universe has evolved the brain to study itself. But enough with the mind-blowing stuff. What does the brain do, and how does it work? The brain is your body's main computer system, the big boss that tells the body what to do and when to do it. Even if much of the body is automatic, the brain monitors how everything is going and tweaks things here and there so everything runs smoothly. It's also responsible for all your thoughts and consciousness, memory, personality, movements, and all of your senses like vision, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. So yeah, it does heaps of varied things. We've been studying the brain for hundreds of years and have figured out quite a lot about it, like what parts do what. But even so, we're not actually sure exactly how it makes us us. Like, how can we picture a scene from 10 years ago in our imagination, or dream up crazy fantasy worlds, or predict the future using information and experience? We don't even know how and why we dream. But what we do know is that the brain is a super complicated computer system made of billions of special cells called neurons that kind of look like spider webs with a long tail. These neurons make lots of handshakes with their neighboring neurons, and this handshake lets them transmit electricity like a computer circuit. Because there's billions of neurons, the brain has more than 100 trillion handshakes and connections, meaning that the amount of data it can handle is ludicrous. Scientists think that one human brain has the potential capacity of 100 billion mini-computers working together, all thanks to lots and lots of connections between the neurons. The more you study, learn, think, and experience the world, the more neurons get connected up. So if you want to unleash the full computing power of your brain, go out there and be curious and learn all the things. As important as the brain is, being the seat of your mind, your intelligence, and your essence and all, we didn't know much about it until very recently. People used to think that your intelligence and personality came from your heart, which makes sense because it feels like it's what keeps you alive. No heartbeat, no person, etc. That's why we have phrases like memorizing something by heart, or having the heart of a lion. One reason for this is that the brain is really, really hard to study, so you can kind of forgive our ancestors for not knowing that's where everything happened. For one, the brain lives in the skull, so it's much harder to extract compared to, say, your liver, which only takes one deep cut through your stomach to reach. Secondly, the brain is super soft and squishy, kind of the consistency of a firm jelly. So it's very hard to dissect and handle, let alone to tease out the minute, intricate components that it's made out of. Lastly, the brain functions as a biological electrical circuit, with the brain cells, or neurons, forming lots of bridging connections called synapses. Each synapse allows for one data point, like a computer bit turning on and off. So you can imagine with 100 trillion synapses, the brain acts as a very powerful computer. But since we can't see neurons and synapses with the naked eye, it would have been very hard for early scientists to figure out that this is what the brain does. From the outside, it just looks like a pile of meat jelly. It was only around the 13th to 15th century that people started catching on that injury to the brain caused some very weird effects, like seizures, personality changes, memory loss, and losing certain functions over parts of your body. We can see evidence of anatomists studying the brain in more detail around the Renaissance. The most famous example of which is Michelangelo cleverly hiding a cross-section of the brain in his well-known painting of the creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel. If you look closely at God and his angel posse, it looks remarkably like a cross-section of the brain, including some of the finer anatomical features like the cerebellum and brainstem. I'll put a link to the image on the show notes, so you can come to your own conclusions as to what Michelangelo might have been alluding to, drawing God in the shape of a brain, or vice versa. Anyway, now we know all kinds of fascinating things about the brain, like where exactly to stimulate to make your face grimace. What functions like swallowing or speaking or moving your arms you lose when you have a stroke and a specific part of your brain dies. The brain is divided into many parts. The biggest part is the cerebral cortex, which is the wrinkled gray matter that covers the majority of the brain on the outer surface. This is then divided again into two hemispheres, left and right, which each have 4 lobes. The frontal lobe controls your personality and what we call executive functioning, like decision-making and planning. This is what gets poisoned first by alcohol, which is why you become more stupid and make poor decisions when you're drunk, while being more emotional and impulsive. It also has most of your motor cortex, which is a strip of the brain that controls all the movements of your body. Like if you want to lift your leg to walk, a particular part of the strip lights up. If you want to make a funny face, you activate another part. And if you want to throw a ball, another part activates. The parietal lobe is where your sensory cortex is, so it knows when a specific part of your body is being touched. It's also where spatial awareness is managed. The temporal lobe is linked to hearing, language comprehension, and storing new memories. If this part is disturbed, like in a temporal lobe seizure, people can have some very weird experiences, like an out-of-body experience, or hallucinating people talking to them, which probably explains many kinds of alien abduction stories or powerful religious visions. Lastly, the occipital lobe at the back is where your vision is managed. Your vision is so complex that it takes up 1/4 of the brain. Below the cerebral cortex lies the core white matter, which has lots and lots of different areas that I won't name, but they coordinate everything from movements, memories, and temperature control. Under this, there's a small round bulb at the back of the brain. This is the cerebellum, and it controls your sense of balance and coordination. This is one of the parts that's affected by alcohol, which is why when you're very drunk, you slur your words and stumble around. Listen to episode 12 if you want to learn more about the effects of alcohol on your brain. Lastly, just in front of the cerebellum lies the brainstem, which is a stalk connecting the brain to the spinal cord. This is possibly the most important part of the brain because it's like the main ground control center for all the important life support functions, like controlling your heart rate and breathing. If you cut through this area, you would die instantly. So you can see already just how complicated the brain is, and we've only just touched the surface. The bottom line is that each of these little parts of the brain use synaptic connections between neurons to perform the various functions. If the electrical pathway is altered, say from a stroke or a head injury, you can lose some brain functions like your ability to speak or moving parts of your limb. You can also have seizures where the electrical signals of the brain fire erratically and chaotically, kind of like when you have fibrillation in the heart. Anyway, we'll probably do many more episodes on all the fascinating things the brain can do in the future, so we'll stop here for now. Hopefully it's a brief enough overview of how the brain works that gets you interested. All of the 5 organs we covered today are very vital to our survival, hence vital organs. If you don't have a brain, you'd have no consciousness that makes you, you. Without heart and lungs, you wouldn't be able to provide oxygen and blood to the rest of the body, so you'd die within minutes. Without kidneys or a liver, you'd quickly build up too many toxic compounds in your blood and surprise, surprise, you'd die. But the other important thing to recognize is just how interconnected the body is. We've already seen this with how the heart is useless without lungs to freshly oxygenate blood, while lungs wouldn't be useful without the heart to pump the blood throughout the body. And we haven't even discussed all of the other supporting organs that work with the vital organs, like blood vessels carrying the blood, or the digestive tract providing fuel to the bloodstream, or the spinal cord and nerves that deliver the brain's instructions for the rest of the body. This is why in medicine, we don't discuss single organs as much, but instead we talk about systems, like the cardiovascular system or the central nervous system. It's a great reminder that we're only alive thanks to the cooperation and teamwork of all of the different parts of our body, no matter how small or insignificant they may seem. So, make sure you respect the awesomeness of your body by eating nutritious meals, exercising regularly to take care of it, rather than making these poor organs work harder with all the sugar and alcohol and dehydration and stress that modern life brings. So, what did we learn today? We learned that the heart is a muscular pump with valves controlled by its very own electric pacemaker system that beats tirelessly to pump blood through our arteries and veins. We learned that the lungs are a densely packed bag of balloons that brings oxygen in and removes carbon dioxide from our blood, so that our cells can keep trucking on. We learned that the kidneys are a complex filter and science lab that balances the water and salt level in our body, while peeing out all the unnecessary waste products. We learned that the liver is a self-regenerating, detoxing beast that munches up drugs and alcohol to protect us from harm's way. We learned that the brain is a redonkulously complicated biological computer that we're still learning lots about, but essentially work thanks to billions and trillions of connections between cells called synapses. We learned that the body is an intricate world full of various organs and systems that work with each other to keep us alive and happy. Well, that's it for today. We'll skip the 2-minute explain today since we've done a 5-for-1 episode. Thank you for listening to Explain This. I hope you learned something interesting and maybe even useful today. Let us know if you enjoyed the style of a collection of mini explains, so I can know if I should try making more of these kind of episodes in the future. Until then, we'll see you next time. Bye for now. Explain This was written and hosted by me, Jin Kim. If you'd like to suggest a topic or just send a lovely message, you can email me at explainthiscast@gmail.com or follow me on Facebook or Twitter.